And thank you everyone for coming to our Cooperation Works Continuing Education Series. This is the last one of the momentous year of 2020. As you know, back in July of 2019, CW did a membership and overwhelmingly people wanted to dive in deeper into feasibility studies. But we decided on the professional development circle that it would be best to illustrate feasibility studies by looking at individual industry sectors. So back in April, Stuart Reed led us off with the consumer food co-ops. Then in June, we had home care worker co-ops. In October, we had food hub co-ops with Jim Matson. And this time around in December, we're finishing off the year strong, taking a look at childcare co-ops. And we have 3 of our very own to share their expertise. We have Kim Coons, the Executive Director of the Center for Cooperative Development. We'll have Lori Sapu, the Rural Development Director of the Co-op Development Center at the North Dakota Association of Rural Electrics. And then we have Jamie Duong. She's a cooperative business specialist at the California Center for Co-op Development. And she has contributed or developed 7 feasibility studies and business plans and is CCCD's go-to person when it comes to patronage, accounting, and audits. So we have a full presentation ahead of us. So why don't we just dive right in? And Kim, lead us off.
Well, I think we'll start off with the poll. Alex, you want to help us with that?
Can you see the poll?
You can just answer all the questions.
I'll give people maybe another 15 seconds or so to get their answers in.
I always think it's not fair that we can't vote.
Yeah, I wasn't actually sure if that would be the case, but
I just tried.
All right, 5 more seconds. All right, thanks all. Can you see the results?
We have an entire child care center right here, except for the bookworm. That's pretty good. Lots of diversity, what I like to do. So there's 2 other, that's our kind of fun poll, but then we have 2 other questions right now just to assess where people are at in the spectrum. So maybe we can do that next.
Can you see the polls? About half of people who voted so far. I'll give it another 15 seconds or so. All right, 5 more seconds. We got most people voting. I will share the results.
Okay, we have lots of familiarity. That's great.
Dinner.
I think I'm sharing my screen.
You're not sharing yet.
Okay.
Now you are sharing.
Am I sharing it now? Good. We're going to be trading things off here. Are you seeing the full slide right now? Okay,
it's your second slide.
It's okay. I think it's the structure of childcare, right? Okay, good. So I just want to start off, I'm just going to start off with just kind of an introduction, then I'm going to turn it over to Lori. She's going to really dive in. And then at the end, we're going to give some examples of the more details in the feasibility. So basically, all of you know this, but basically a childcare center, the structure of the center is that it incorporates as a charitable nonprofit and operates as a co-op. So it's democratically governed by the members, whether they're parents and or employers and or workers, whomever. The members elect the board of directors, and just like in any other co-op, the board sets the policies and hires and oversees the director, and the director implements the policies, manages operations, and hires and supervises the teachers and aides. And about 320, something like that, that it was about 10 years ago. And that's where the parents basically are the members of the cooperative, and they elect the board. And then there's an employer model, and this could be a single employer that is assisting with the childcare, or it can be a consortium, meaning a group of employers that together are starting a childcare center. In the case of the of either model, it could be the employers or the parents who are the members and on the board of directors. A lot of times, it's I would say the most prevalent is that the parents are the members, but then they have a representative of the employer on the board, or employer representatives that are executives that are also parents. And then there's a worker co-op model. The thing that's kind of surprising is that there aren't very many worker co-ops in the childcare model, and we can talk about why that is later. There's also a couple of other strategies. The strategy that the ICA group has been really looking at is gathering together home care providers that have their own daycare center in their homes, and then they share services, marketing, and so forth. And then there's just kind of an informal co-op that parents use, a babysitting co-op. We're going to be focusing really on this childcare center model in this presentation. So I just wanted to just go over just really briefly an example of the parent cooperative. This is Knights Landing Children's Center. It's in a rural community. There was no childcare at all there. And this one, the parents elected the board of directors. And then the childcare center has it's a full-time year-round childcare. A lot of the members actually are farm worker. They work on farms, and they're farm workers. The ages are 2 to 5, and like I said, there was no licensed childcare actually in the whole community when it was started. And then they offer the care on the sliding fee scale that they implement themselves. They also operate a state preschool within the center, so they have some. That's a kind of a subsidy for the parents who qualify for that. This is another California co-op. It's a parent-employee model. It's called GeoKids. And GeoKids was started by parents. They went to the employer and said, hey, we'd like to have a childcare center. They're actually federal workers, engineers at Geological Survey. They made a compelling case for the need, and now the employer pays for the space. They pay like $5 a year or something like that, and they also get to use all of the amenities that are at the site as well. The parents all pay for the care, and the board is made up of the parents, and there's one representative of one executive on the board. So I'm going to turn it over to Lori now. Let me see how I can stop sharing here. Oh my goodness. Oh, okay, Lori, good.
Can you see my slide, everybody? Okay. Well, thank you, Kim. We used one of the models that Kim referred to develop an employer-assisted childcare consortium. So I'm going to walk through the process and show how it gathers the information needed to prove out the feasibility of a childcare cooperative, and also how the process can save in pre-development costs by engaging the community or the parents in the work. The childcare cooperative I'm referencing is in the small town of Hazen, North Dakota, population of 2,333. And actually, if you're familiar with North Dakota, that is one of our larger cities, but I understand nationwide that is considered a small rural town. The center has a capacity to care for up to 77 children, infants through age 12. So the great thing about cooperatives, I think, is that the model is malleable because people and communities are just so diverse. And I suspect we have yet to uncover all the various ways that cooperatives could assist in developing childcare capacity in our nation. So to just set the stage for this project, I'm going to read the definition for the cooperative model we used. This is Kim's definition, I believe. In the employer-assisted consortium, businesses rather than parents are the members that join together to provide near worksite childcare for their employees. In this model, the board is primarily comprised of member business representatives who may also be parents. Business members share the costs and benefits associated with the program and typically charge fees to employee parents using the center. So here I am going to give a plug for Cooperation Works and all the wonderful cooperators we have within our network. When our center first identified the need for additional childcare capacity, a little research made it clear that it would be best to bring experience in to talk about the model to those that were interested. In our case, we were looking to develop childcare cooperatives with groups of people who did not have experience in operating any sort of childcare. They were primarily employers and parents in need of care. We started by holding a forum for rural development professionals to learn about childcare cooperatives, and Kim graciously led the session as an expert that had developed several centers in California. After the forum, it took about 2 years for a group to consider forming a cooperative and to reach out to us for help. We also relearned, because we did already know this, but that you need to be invited to the table. Even though you know it could be a solution to a problem, if it isn't their idea, it's difficult to make it successful. The first 2 cities that we worked with, we were unsuccessful. A regional development group had received a USDA grant to identify 2 cities in need of childcare capacity and to form cooperatives to fill that gap. They engaged us in that process, and what we encountered was a trust issue. The people wondered why we were working in their communities and what was in it for us. So as a starting point, we documented the area's need for more childcare through demographics. Often people know that there are needs for more childcare capacity, but they don't know to what degree. It's typical through personal experience of having trouble finding a care provider or an employer being unable to seal the deal on a new employee due to the lack of childcare. The demographics will help document that need. This information was used to entice the employers to the table and to encourage their investment. The demographic information helps you learn about the families needing childcare in the area and their ability to pay. We use the US Census Fact Finder website as the source for our data, and we collected a 3 to 5 year history of that information. Here we broke out the demographic factors for families with children, 2-parent families, single-parent families, and families with children under the age of 6. The income and poverty data helped us understand how the wages for families with young children compare with others in the area. And this information was also useful in estimating a fair tuition per child or to discover what our need was for subsidies. The employment data is also a significant indicator. What we learned in Hazen was that there was a considerable number of people that desired to work but were unable to enter that workforce because they couldn't find any childcare. The people that are unemployed by choice, those that have chosen to stay home with their children or for other reasons, they're not going to show up in that unemployment count. So here you'll get a count for the number of children that may need care should their parents engage in the workforce. And it's here where we actually heard the most stories. We heard about people delaying childbirth because they needed income first and they didn't have a place to take their child if they should have one. We heard about people working together within communities to schedule who gets to have the next baby because there was only one childcare spot left. And I can't imagine the stress behind that. Here we also identified other childcare providers in the region and whether they had a waiting list. In most cases, we were able to also learn what they were charging for tuition, so we had a comparable. It's very important to remember that you are developing the cooperative to complement current providers and not replace them. So for this project, it was a parent and an employer that first reached out to us for help to organize a cooperative. Using the demographic data we collected, we prepared informational packets and invited employers to come to a meeting to learn about childcare cooperatives. The packets had information on what childcare cooperatives are, as well as summarize that demographic data illustrating the need for additional capacity. We had 8 employers show up for that first meeting, and like it's common in most small towns, they all knew each other, which was really quite helpful. We were suggesting a facility that could care for around 30 children. And they countered us right away, asking us, like, why aren't you thinking bigger? And so those 8 remained with us for the entire duration of the planning. The employers were a mix of cooperatives, a bank, a school, a nursing home, and a hospital that attended that first meeting. The steering committee was set that first day. And based on our 2 previous unsuccessful attempts, I can say, it matters who's leading the charge. We had people at the table that had decision-making authority. We had employers that understood the value of cooperation. And we had a go-getter local bank that wasn't afraid of taking a risk. To round out the steering committee, there was a local childcare licensor to help with regulations, and our center provided the technical assistance. At this point in the project, we began completing the IRS Form 1023 for nonprofit status, and it took us about 7 months to get approval once it was submitted. The cooperative employers donated attorney staff time to prepare that paperwork. The next step was to more firmly determine how large your childcare should be. It was easy in this case because we had that targeted audience, the employees of the employers that were involved in the business. So each employer was responsible for conducting a survey at their business. So the survey gathered the employees' names. Obviously, we knew where they worked and whether they needed childcare during the past 12 months while they were at work. We also gathered the age of the children needing care and the amount of time per day or week that they needed care and the times of day. We asked how the children were currently being cared for. For instance, is it a relative or a spouse or a in-home care provider, and whether they were able to find the care they needed, and if not, why? Then we asked who cares for the children snow days and or when they're ill, and whether the child was needing before or after school care or transportation to that care. We then asked how many miles they drive from their home to their care provider and how many miles they drive from their care provider to work. That might kind of seem like a quirky question, but a lot of times in North Dakota, the town that you work in isn't the town that you live in. And then we finalized it with asking them whether they're going to need care within the next 2 years, what kind of care they would need, what time periods they need that care for, and what dollar range were they willing to pay, and whether they would consider using childcare that's supported by their employer. And of course, an open-ended question so they could list any comments or concerns. What we learned is that demographics are a good starting point and it's a good way to help engage people in the work initially. But as the employer suspected, we weren't thinking nearly large enough. We expanded our efforts to 75 children. Working committees will now come into play to help gather the information you need for your feasibility study and business plan. They'll complement the steering committee. So for this particular project, the employer's dedicated staff to serve on working committees to move that development work forward. The committees help gather the information needed to determine the business size, childcare age range, and startup costs. So remember, the planning at this stage is typically being done without the involvement of a childcare director. You're still just trying to prove up whether it's a viable option to move forward with your plans. One steering committee member should be connected to each working committee to keep all those moving parts connected. There can be a committee that focuses on the site, equipment, and supplies. This committee will search for viable locations within the communities and their costs, prepare a list of the needed equipment and supplies. And I'm going to get into this in a little bit more deeply in just a moment. But there's also can be a membership and publicity committee that will be involved in membership recruitment, drafting membership policies, and publicity. This committee will also work on recommendations related to the size of the childcare facility and the ages of children to care for, such as infant, toddler, or preschool, or all ages. You know, we all come from different places and community needs vary. And Jamie's going to get into this, I assume, in her section, but the ages you choose to care for really does matter. It is much more expensive to care for infants within your center, as we did. But in North Dakota, the towns are so small that there typically aren't options for parents like there might be in other places. A staffing committee can be responsible for recruitment of a program director, of the program director candidates, and tasks related to professional development and staffing for the cooperative. And last but not least, of course, is the finances and fundraising committee to lead and coordinate those fundraising events, identify grant opportunities, and prepare funding applications. So this is the worksheet that we use to determine our startup budget. As you can see, initially, you'll need to determine your anticipated sources of gifts and contributions, grants, or other sources of funding. Our goal was to keep the bank loan to a minimum. The fundraising committee addressed this by preparing a list of funding sources available for childcare in the area. USDA may be a source. Many states have some incentive financing as well. Local development agencies may have some grant funds, or private foundations. Sometimes regional health insurance providers have grant funds available to build things like healthy play spaces. We found our grant opportunities to be quite limited in our state for childcare. This project received most of its startup funds through employer donations and in-kind contributions. Not all of the employers were able to contribute, but one contributed up to $50,000 in that first year, and several staggered their contributions over a 3 to 5 year period to assist with cash flow during those early years. We did get a small grant, and the fundraising committee held a rummage sale to raise some funds. So in the end, our startup income items look like this. We had a bank loan of $120,000. We had contributions of $110,000. Fundraising netted us $5,000, and we received a $2,000 grant for a grand total of $237,000 for our startup. Now, the in-kind contributions are another really important factor. We didn't quantify the monetary value on those, but in this project, the school that was involved agreed to provide staff to prepare, deliver, and serve meals to the child care center. This reduced the degree of investment we needed in that commercial kitchen and in staff time during that lunch hour. Employers provided employees to renovate and paint the building, including electrical work, and to install fencing and egress windows. And employers used the talents of staff to prepare logos and marketing materials. The community brought in donations of toys and supplies for the center. So at this point, we also became familiar with subsidy programs that support low-income families or families with special needs, such as food commodity programs for child care centers. And Jamie may be mentioning some of this when she speaks. So simultaneously, the Site Equipment and Supplies Committee got to work searching for potential sites. They already knew that we needed a place for about 75 children. and that according to North Dakota regulations, we needed 35 square feet of open space per child. It's a small town, so there really isn't a bad location. However, we needed to keep the city and county zoning restrictions in mind. The county childcare licensor participated in this step with us and went with the committee to tour each site and note what would be required for renovations to comply with regulations. You also need to keep outdoor play space in mind. In North Dakota, we needed 75 square feet per child, preferably fenced space. And of course, affordability is definitely a factor. Now is time to start thinking about whether to own or lease that space and what impact that will have on your tuition, cash flow, and ability to pay quality staff. The committee toured 2 existing commercial buildings and estimated roughly the cost of new construction, using the feedback from the licensor and advice from employees in the carpentry trade. They made estimates on the cost of renovation. Information was reported out to the steering committee for further action. So at the same time, the Site, Equipment, and Supplies Committee was working on estimating the startup costs for a director, furniture, and equipment, also the playground and supplies. The committee investigated costs for classroom furniture and indoor play equipment, office and safety equipment, and they factored in the building and renovation costs that were provided by the Site Committee. For this startup, we projected that we needed $15,000 to pay for a director prior to opening. We needed $145,000 to purchase a building. We needed $35,000 to renovate that building in order to comply with regulations. We needed $18,100 for furniture and equipment, $20,000 for playground equipment and fencing, and $6,000 for supplies. This came to a grand total of $239,110 for startup costs, which was slightly above what we felt we had for our startup income. Media is really an important part of the development. It lets people know there is a plan to address a need in a community. It helps you tell the size of that need and how people can be involved. For this project, we waited until the employers were comfortable with the scenarios before contacting the media. We didn't want to get those hopes up and make it look like we were promising something that we couldn't deliver on. So through the media campaign, we attracted the interest of a church council that was getting ready to dissolve their membership and were wondering what to do with their building. We also attracted the investment of parents and of people that were interested in working at the cooperative. And interestingly, when we launched the media campaign in one of those first 2 cities that we worked in, that we were not successful in developing a cooperative, a lady from a neighboring town read about the need and within a couple weeks had purchased a building and had began renovating it for a childcare center. And so we didn't get the cooperative that we were working towards, but actually the problem was solved and much quicker than the cooperative process. And the town now does have adequate childcare capacity. The task of engaging the media will typically fall on the membership and publicity committee. And we went with just reaching out strictly to free media for this task, and they did a great job picking up the story. We relied on the talent from within our participating businesses to develop that communication strategy and to develop logos and brochures to market to members. So we now had our startup budget that we were comfortable with. We had our site selected, and we had informed the public of our plans, and it was officially time to incorporate. At this point, we transitioned the steering committee to the first seated board. We anticipated that some of the employers would want to transition off the board and they would appoint parents from their employee base to serve on that board. But that was not the case. They expressed their interest in remaining on the board, with parents continuing their roles in the working committees. They also wanted to stay connected so they could identify and address problems as they arose. And you can find templates of the cooperative's bylaws and articles on our website, and I've provided the link there in the PowerPoint. Foundation work to hire a director began early on, and it's one of the major stressors during the planning stages, especially in small communities, because we have limited access to people with experience. The staffing committee will take on this task. They will be responsible for the development of a job description and provide comparable salary ranges to the board. They'll also come up with a slate of candidates for the board. Once hired, the director will have that final authority for hiring staff, as well as identifying staffing ratios, the final staffing ratios, parent volunteer activities, staffing qualifications, and background checks. This person will also begin projecting labor costs, which Jamie will cover. Confident we had a good director to guide us through implementation and into operating, the new board made an offer on the building, which was accepted. Using some of the startup contributions as a down payment, we did a bank loan on the building for $120,000. The banker on the board, who you can see on this PowerPoint, she was absolutely instrumental at this point. When it came time to buy that building, she didn't even pause. She just said, let's do it. And so who can argue with that? She helped us secure financing through her bank and applied for an interest buy down through the Bank of North Dakota, which netted us an interest rate of approximately 1% over 10 years, or a monthly payment of $1,050. We actually had the site secured before the center director was hired. I would probably recommend the reverse for future projects. It's most likely best to get the director's opinion on the building prior to sealing the deal. Other considerations, you may be able to allocate spots to employers. For the first 3 to 5 years of operating, each employer could agree to fill a certain number of spots for childcare. The employer should have a good handle on their employees' needs based on the surveys conducted. For example, if one of the businesses agrees to filling 10 spots, but employees only subscribe to 8 spots, the employer would pay for the remaining 2 spots until they are filled. This will help guarantee the cooperative is filled to a certain capacity during the startup and help secure with the cash flow during that period. It does take time for parents to become comfortable with new care environments for their children, so it may take time to get up to capacity. Also, even though the employers may be eager to keep the childcare spots available for their own employees, it will be important to leave a certain percentage of those spots open for other children within the community. This will help drive community support for the center and will also help with that quest for getting your nonprofit status approved. Once we had the site secured and a director hired, the membership committee got to work recruiting members. They drafted the parent handbook outlining membership expectations such as payment procedures, education expectations, and membership policies. By now, they have defined their hours of operation, the meals they will be serving, and parent participation expectations. They held a community-wide meeting to roll out the plan and begin accepting enrollments. In this case, the childcare need was so severe that the co-op filled up quickly, and there really wasn't a need for us to rely on those allocated spots. So in summary, this project took 9 months to develop from start to finish. It took 7 months for us to get the IRS approval on the tax exempt status once we got that application submitted. The cooperative owns their building, which yes, it is a church, and it has capacity to care for up to 77 children. There are 12 full-time employees and 4 part-time employees. So in addition to those articles and bylaws, we have placed templates of the parent and employer handbooks and enrollment forms on our website as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jamie for a look at how those pro formas come together.
Hi, everyone.
Jamie, I think I'm going before you, right?
Oh, are you going one more time?
No, I thought I was going to do the intro part and then turn it over to you.
Oh, yep. It totally works for me.
Oops. I was just going to go over the overview of the feasibility. So just like Lori was saying, is there an unmet need for childcare. That's the market research and the parent survey. And if the need is confirmed, then it's what model is going to work best for that. The worker, parent, employer. The feasibility is going to include the startup costs, like Lori described, the operating costs, and those would be the facility, the supplies, everything that that Lori shared, and the staffing by far is going to be your biggest expense. And then I just wanted to preface Jamie's details on the regulations. So in every state, childcare is highly regulated. There are licensing requirements. You should not be able to care for children without a license. There are some states have exceptions for churches, but for the most part, the licensing is required. That licensing includes the building and the site, the square footage, fencing, toilets even, and then the staffing. There are the structure of the staffing, how many director, how many teachers, assistant teachers, aides. Sometimes the job titles change a little bit, but basically that's what they are. And there's education requirements for each of those. And then there's age-defined requirements. So it depends on what age group the child is in, how other regulations are formulated. So usually they're grouped in infants, toddlers, preschoolers, and school age. Again, states kind of vary on what those ages are, but those are, according to those age groups, there will be regulations on the group size, how many kids you can have in one room, no matter how big the room is, what the ratios are, how many children per staff you can have. And then it becomes this balancing act of in childcare between how much things cost and safety. And an important thing about safety is safety isn't described as, oh, put the medicine up high so kids won't eat it. And that's a basic safety concern, but mostly safety is focused on what is good for children. So we know that having one caregiver for 20 kids is not good for kids, because kids, especially at early ages, need attention, they need care. So that's where the regulations come in. There was a time when we didn't have very many regulations, and now regulations are almost, in some states, are very, very stringent. So you're operating on a very, very thin margin, which means that you have to really have planned very, very well. So parents have economic limitations. There's not an unlimited amount that they can pay. And then the expenses of childcare limit what employers can pay. Most employers do not. I don't know of any employer that provides a full benefit, free childcare for everybody. And then incorporation becomes a consideration. And this is where I know some people feel that it should be incorporated as co-op and so forth. From my perspective, we want to do everything that makes it as cost efficient as possible. And so being an exempt nonprofit is the best way to go. Childcare, just like any education program, is automatically going to be approved. And so you have the advantage incorporating as a nonprofit that you don't have to pay any taxes. Sometimes you're going to have a minimum tax that in any for-profit incorporation, and so you want to save that money. But it also makes the center eligible for grants. It makes fundraising easier because people can make tax deductions. So and basically the nonprofit corporation is going to insulate people from liability, it's service at cost, and so forth. So I'm going to turn this over to Jamie now, and she's going to give all the great details.
I'll do my best. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Are you guys able to see?
Yes.
Okay, okay, I'll take that. Yes, thank you. So this is a worksheet that we put together for a childcare co-op feasibility study in Montana specifically. So we're going to go a few states away from North Dakota. And so here we have the operating budget on this page that we put together. As Kim mentioned, there's center can incorporate as a nonprofit or for-profit, and so I have two scenarios presented here. The green is the for-profit, and I'll touch on that a little later. And so you'll see here that we start off with the revenues, and there's a couple line items here. First, we have tuition, and that's just the the monthly tuition that we would charge, and that's kind of the consistent stream of income for the center. And then here we have kind of the hourly rates. This is more for additional / last minute care that the center may have. It's not supposed to be a consistent stream. You can see here that it makes up a very small amount, and so this is just any bonus income that the center might bring in. And then last one is a fairly significant consideration, the employer subsidies. So these are cash subsidies. Because of the high cost of infant care, we accounted for a fairly large subsidy from the employers for the infants, and then a smaller one for the toddlers and preschool. And then here we have meal reimbursements. This is, so there's a federal food program that will reimburse for meals as long as, so even for-profit centers will qualify as long as the enrollment meets the income eligibility requirements. And I believe the program is the Child and Adult Food Care Program. So this one is kind of, on the enrollment. And then here we have the expenses, different types. So we have, director, and then bookkeeping, etc. Here you'll notice that there's a couple expenses highlighted in blue. These are expenses that represent the additional assistance that the employer can provide. It's not necessarily cash assistance. In this particular case, the employer was a hospital, and so we were expecting the center to be within the would be sharing a building in the hospital, and so rent and liability insurance was, we assumed that it would be encompassed with that. And then copying, printer, cleaning services. These are kind of the retail prices that you might pay out of pocket if you were to go out and pay for it. But again, we were assuming that the center would be, within the employer's building. They might be able to utilize the internet. Hospitals probably have in-house cleaning staff. And so these expenses might actually be lower in reality if with the employer assistance, but we decided to account for just to kind of show what the scenario would look like if the center did have to pay for these expenses on their own. And so again, we have the the variable expenses here. And then finally, we go down here, and you'll notice in yellow, this is what the bottom line looks like without any additional employer subsidy assistance. The center comes out to a fairly big loss, needless to say. So it's really not feasible without the employer's assistance. In the gray, this is what the center will look like, about $10,000 at the end of the year. I do want to highlight that it's not very much, even after all that assistance. If I scroll up back here, when you count up the both the cash subsidy and the additional assistance, the the amount that the employer is contributing is about $100,000 per year. So it's not an insignificant amount, but even so, the center, is not operating on very much, and then for the green, for the for-profit incorporation, there's not a lot of difference up until this point, but the main consideration is just, of course, the tax treatment. In Montana, the state corporation tax is 6.75%, with the minimum being $50. And then, of course, the federal tax rate for corporation is 21%. And so that is about, so that's about $3,000 per year, or in this case, $3,000 in taxes. So 30%. It's not an insignificant amount. So that's really, something to consider. And then this page is connected to this tuition and salaries fees page. It's connected so that we can, here we kind of project kind of the revenue and then expenses based on the regulations and then kind of assumptions that we make. So this first table is the kind of the tuition fees. And so we, you can see here, actually on the side I have the regulations. So in Montana, the age groups are kind of divided up into 4 general age groups, 0 to 23 months, 2 to 3 years, 4 years, and then 5 years and above. And then the respective ratios and maximum group size for each age group. For our purposes, it made more sense for us to have 3 age groups. We, instead of having just one classroom for only 4-year-olds, it was more cost effective in our case to allocate the 4-year-olds to either the toddler room or the preschool room. So in Montana, you can have mixed age groups as long as the ratios and the maximum room size for the youngest child is maintained at all times. So in the case of the toddler room, the ratios and the maximum occupancy size do not change if you decide to add a 4-year-old to that room. For the older children, of course, that definitely drops the ratio down from 14 to 10 and the maximum group size from 32 to 24 in this case. But if you look at this table here, you'll notice that I actually put 20 here rather than 24. And that's because although the center could, in theory, add 4 more children to this room, you would need to hire a 3rd teacher for those 4 kids, and that would bring the ratio down from 1 to 10 to 1 to 8. And so it makes, so in order for the center to operate at maximum efficiency, it's better for them to operate based on the ratios rather than the maximum occupancy size. And so in this case, here I have the table. I've set it up with formulas so that really it's like I could play around and see what it looks like depending on the number of children there are. And so this table actually gets filtered down to this other table here for number of staff needed. So this formula will, so if I change this number to like 8, this number will change as well. And here the formulas are also set up here so that I should backtrack a little bit. There's really 3 main staffing roles that the Montana regulations identify. There's the director, the lead teacher, and the assistant teacher, and they each have their own education, training, and certification requirements. So of course that affects the pay, the pay scale for them as well. And each center needs 1 director. That director could be in any room or no room at all. As long as they're on site, that's all that matters. And so I just kind of arbitrarily place them in the infant room, but it doesn't really matter. And then the lead teacher, there needs to be at least one lead teacher in each room. And then you can supplement or maintain the ratios with assistant teachers to make it a little bit more affordable. And so I've set up the ratios so that, once there's a 1 here, if the room requires additional teachers to maintain that 4-to-1 ratio, these cells will automatically update accordingly. And so this pretty much calculates kind of amount of staff needed and what type of staff. And then again, that further filters down here based on, and so we made a few assumptions here, like how many hours per week, and then the wages, and then the room, and then kind of the weekly, monthly, and annual salary. The weekly and monthly kind of helps to figure out cash flows, of course. And for us, we broke down assistant teachers by 1 and 2, with 1 being kind of like college students looking for a part-time job. And so that, that allows for a slightly lower wage. And, like Kim mentioned, the co-op is kind of operating on very thin margins. So anywhere you can save money, that's something you want to look at. And in here, just a little bit. So this is something I kind of just put together on the fly. I think it kind of helps explain how I got to these numbers, the tuition per child. It might be a little confusing, so feel free to kind of stop me and I'll try to clarify. And so basically here, so this table, this table, I probably should highlight that. So the percentage of staff is kind of like how much total staff time is taken up by each age group. And that's really based on, kind of the number of teachers are in that room. And so here we have about 4. And then that gives us a percentage. And then taking kind of the total monthly expenses, and this is taken from the operating budget, and then multiplying that by this percentage. And so this is, and so the $16,000 represents the portion of the expense of the center's expenses that each age group is responsible for. And the tuition per child is just how much the tuition would need to be to cover for all of the expenses without any additional employer assistance or subsidies. And then of course we add in the cash subsidy, and this is kind of what the subsidized price would need to look like. Obviously that's not what is on here. It's $850 in the table, and that's again because as Kim mentioned, parents can only pay so much. And so so the older kids do in part subsidize for the high cost. And these numbers also take into account, of course, the additional employer assistance that we talked about earlier. And so with the subsidies and the assistance, we arrive to these numbers, and you can see that it's not too far off with the toddlers and the preschool age, $750 and then $590. So the preschool got rounded up a little bit. And let's see. And then here I put together a sample schedule. I think it helped me to really visualize things a little bit. And in addition to all the regulations for the children, there's also labor laws and regulations that you need to also keep in mind. And so there's, as teachers can't work more than 8 hours, or otherwise the overtime, regulations kick in. And so this kind of, gives you a rough idea of how many hours, how many shifts you'll need. We assumed that the director would be spending about half of their time in the classroom to help kind of supplement kind of the staffing needs, and especially when there's like shift changes, or if a teacher needs to leave the classroom for whatever reason. And we also assumed that the center would be operating for about 13.5 hours per day, and made assumptions about kind of the length of shifts. But of course, that's something you can play around with. And so if you were wondering why, even though I just said this, the staff ratio is 4:1, why are there 4 teachers here? The assistant teacher is, we assume 20 hours for that assistant teacher. And again, that's really to account for any shift changes, lunch breaks, and just, another, it's better to have some room, wiggle room, rather than to really try to track it on the dot. So that's something we did. And yeah, I think that's, and then of course we have the salaries for all the staff comes out to be about a little over 300,000, and you can see here that the co-op only, the center only brings in about 400 grand estimated. So even before, and that's before and without all of the other operating expenses that come into running a center. So the staffing definitely takes up a lot of, it's a very big expense for the center. Yeah, and then I think that's it. Any questions?
Yeah, I got a question. I need a copy of this for myself. I mean, I'm just saying, this is amazing work, and I think it would do wonders in with some of the projects that I'm working on specifically. It could be modified to fit almost any project, and to really lay everything out for the co-ops, especially people who don't know anything about numbers and stuff. This breaks it down really. I think you can navigate this with a proper mentor. So I'd like to have access to it if y'all don't mind sharing. I'll give you some of my stuff if you want it.
Yeah. I mean, Kim, you can answer that, I think.
Yeah, I think it's fine for people that are interested in it.
Yeah, and I can clean it up a little bit and then send it over to anyone that wants it. This was kind of designed so that it'd be pretty easy to, if you weren't familiar with Excel, of course there's certain areas that, it's set up so that you can just, enter numbers in and then, let Excel do the work for you. Because the ratios and the maximum group size, it is kind of hard to keep that in mind while you're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work for the center. Yeah, well, there's no other questions. Thank you so much.
There are some questions coming in through the chat box. So we have one from Margaret saying or asking if you have found any minimum break-even points, minimum number of children, or minimum number of infants, or maximum number of infants, sorry.
I don't think I have it here, but again, I'd say the ratios kind of help. I think you're probably gonna, whatever break-even point you get, it's gonna be likely to be rounded up to the nearest ratio amount. So so in terms of like with like the toddlers, for example, the 8, it's going to be multiples of 8. That's kind of my assumption, just for cost efficiency. But sorry, I don't know if that answers your question, but
I think also you need to be at capacity all the time.
And is that why, this is Margaret, is that why we see parents getting billed for hours, even though their children may be sick or they take vacation or they can't send their kids to the center?
Mm-hmm.
Got
You
it.
have to do that.
Yeah.
I think in some areas where because I, and you know, I think Kim could correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, there's probably plenty of parents that can't you know, find spots for their kids, and I think maybe having a better communication, you know, like the center can like make if the center can know beforehand, like so in the operating budget we accounted for like these last minute additional care. If a parent knows that they want to go on vacation for a month during the summer, if that can give the center time to, you know, put out a notice, hey, we have a spot, you know, for this amount of time. If you want to take advantage of that, you know, please do. And that will relieve the parent of you know, having to pay for care that they don't need, and then a parent that needs a spot and have it. So I think you know, utilizing social media or just whatever communications that the community has to get kind of the word out, so that, you know, you can so it doesn't have to be that way.
We had a question, do you consider benefits for childcare workers in the cost structure?
We try to. We did have a line here. Where did it go? We had, but it was very difficult. It's kind of hard to go to an employer and with, you know, and show that in center would otherwise be operating at $45,000 loss, and you know, and try to have, you know, pay time off or health reimbursement. So yeah, if for example, if I were to take out the meal assistance, or like if the employer decided to not help out with the meal assistance, that already brings us down to a -15 loss. So yeah, I guess it depends. I think, you know, one area you could reduce expenses is to offer lower wages. So minimum wage might be a little different for each area. So $13. This was done about 2 years ago. So $13 per hour is quite a bit for I think that area in Montana. But you know, but so if, you know, if the center wanted to offer benefits at the expense of something else, you know, that's something you can look into, I think.
If folks have other questions for any of our presenters today, you can either unmute yourself, you should be able to do that and just ask, or you can drop it into the chat box if you're more comfortable with that.
Judith, you have a question. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Fine. There. Okay, it came through. It was mentioned there's some USDA assistance that may be available for childcare co-ops, or when you were covering grants, was there something in particular?
Yeah, there are, depending on how it's structured, there are community facility grants, or there's the rural business development grants. The thing that you'll want to watch out for is some of the grants then require you to have an architect or engineer involved in the facility. And sometimes the cost of the grant, or the amount of grant, is equal to that architect or engineering fee. So it just depends on what it is that you're asking to use that money for. Margaret, you may have more to share on that.
Yeah, and the Rural Business Development Grant, that RBDG that was mentioned, that would be more for planning.
Yeah.
And community facilities is obviously for facility.
Well, there's a special section of it just for childcare though. So that's kind of good. That calls out in the facilities.
Yeah.
So I have a question. So this is for licensed daycare, right? So is there anybody doing any kind of childcare that doesn't have to be like such a licensed childcare? Does that make sense? Does that question even make sense?
They want to break the law. You'd be breaking the law. You can't do that.
Like ever, like in any
If you're caring for, well, each state has it a little bit different, but if you're caring for children of more than one household, you have to be licensed.
In our state, you do not. You can be a home care provider up to a certain number of children. And then that network, I can't remember, Kim, if you mentioned the network or not, but there's, you know, home care providers then can form a cooperative among themselves for efficiencies in purchasing supplies or covering for each other when they're, you know, going on vacation or ill, or even for programming.
And Kim, may I ask a question? You're in California. Well, a few years ago, I came across some criteria for non-monetary childcare co-ops, parents. Is that, and it was based out of California, is that still?
Well, here's the way the regulations work in California is you can, if all parents are on site, then you can, and there's no money involved, no money. You can't buy one thing, not a toy or anything. You don't have to be licensed, but they have to be on site. So I'll give you an example. The law school here in Davis actually has had that kind of childcare available for students because they're on site. So that's really cool. But usually parents are working and they're not all on the same site.
Well, what I read is at least not all parents had to be there at the same time, but a parent had to be, if you needed 3 providers, it was a limit of 12 children, you might need 3 providers. So they all had to be parents. They couldn't be your personal assistant or someone else. But
I don't think that's not my knowledge of the law.
Okay,
Here.
just curious.
So yeah, Kim, so there's an organization in Hawaii called Tutu and Me. And interesting enough, they have set up a system where they're doing these like mobile, like they set up tents and mats and programs, and it's sort of like a parent run system that, and I don't know how they do it. I don't know if Hawaii laws allow them to do it that way, but it's a whole nonprofit that has set up childcare in areas that don't have buildings, and they actually put up like a tent, and they have mats on the floor, and they have a curriculum, and they train parents, and so I was just wondering if anybody else has anything like that. That like, and I don't know how they're getting around the laws for licensed daycare, but I'm pretty sure they're doing it legally because they're this big nonprofit all over the islands. So you would think they'd have to be doing that within the law.
Yeah, I would just want to like put in that too, that I'll just drop the link of a Cincinnati childcare co-op that does in-home stuff, and they essentially just flipped on their head, like instead of having children come to their home, it's more or less the provider going to other people's homes, and then having like a coordination among, 3 families in that neighborhood to then provide care in that one person's home. But I think that there are a lot of creative ways, and obviously like a center, like from what I've like had exposure to, centers have to be licensed, but there's creative ways to get around regulation for in-home care. And in the way that we know that the state works right in favor of white communities. So I would just like add that too.
Cynthia, do you want to share? You put something into chat. Would you mind unmuting yourself and sharing that?
Well, yeah, I just put in, I had a colleague on here, and we're looking at not only the care center model, but also the home-based providers. And I think it was just mentioned, Kim, that home-based, you can work together, but how home-based or family childcare, which is how it's defined in Nebraska, could fit into a cooperative model. We're trying to get creative, but I also, along with the law in Nebraska, anyone who provides childcare for more than 4 or more children from 2 or more different families, and that includes your own family. So once you care for a child from outside your family, you have to be licensed.
Yeah, there's family. I'm sure you're saying there's family home daycare licensing.
Yeah, yeah.
So the biggest drawback of family home daycare from the consumer point of view is that if that childcare provider gets sick or their kids get sick, there's no care. So the nice thing about forming a co-op of childcare providers is there might be some ability to rotate those kids around and make up for that kind of predicament, because that's really, really hard for parents.
Exactly. Having been a parent of that child. It's an advantage of a center is you don't have to, and some even offer sick child care. So if your child is ill, you can at least work part of the day.
Kim or Lori, are you aware of any states that provide substantial subsidies to help with childcare, either to the parents or to the centers?
I'm not. I know that our state rolls out a program. Our legislature meets on a biennial basis, and they roll out enough money to pay for maybe the buildings for 3 centers every 2 years. And so everybody's got their applications ready, and it's just a race to get that money. But I know with the pandemic that it's really hurt the capacity of childcare, and I'm thinking it might be a topic of states in the future. Just, how do we get some of that care capacity back up and running?
It is, it's something that it's underserved. There's numerous ways. There's a lot of different programs in California and in different states, but it's not enough at all. And it's usually a needs-based, and even those that have the need, there's not enough money for them.
How does Head Start fit in with this mix?
Head Start is another needs-based program, and it's a good, generally speaking, it's really good. Knight's Landing Child Care Center the program that I put up there, they for a while had a Head Start in their program, but it is so bureaucratic and so regulated. And then the funds are federal funds, but they're allocated at the county level. And that particular preschool has had so much. It's hard to say that it's not racism, because the school district has gotten a lot better, but they would give all the leftover supplies and everything to this center. And, it's really bad, and charge it for the regular cost. And so it's the same thing with the meal plan. And that's another way that centers can get together, and especially the family home daycare homes can save some money, because you have to have these meal plans that take forever to put together. And so so if you can have somebody doing that meal planning and turning those in and taking care of that bureaucratic stuff in a kind of a template way, it can save, because a lot of centers just it's not worth the time, to put into it.
Could I also add something about early Head Start? So I'm working with this nonprofit that's starting a daycare center, but they've signed on to early Head Start, and it actually doesn't cover the cost of the care, but you're not allowed to get any subsidies. You can't get a copay from the parent. You can't get any other subsidy from it. So almost no one takes it, except the only ones that will take it are counties that will subsidize the program with county funds. And so there's only 1 or 2 providers, but they take children under the age of 4, from 6 weeks to 4, which is cut, or the infants. They take the infants, which is really the most expensive, but it doesn't cover cost. So it's kind of a problematic.
Yeah, if I can interject, I mean, there's games that you have to play, like the state preschool that the Knights Landing Center has. They will only match, they'll only pay up to what other parents pay. So that's one of the reasons why they have the sliding fee scale, is that they have to make the top tier higher so that it will cover the costs of the state preschool kids. And so there, I don't know if that would work for, probably not for your early start program, but there's a lot of game playing you have to do.
Yeah, as far as I've been learning, there's no way you can subsidize it. If you get early head start, you can't get any other fees, and therefore you're operating at a loss right there. So it's very problematic.
I saw Rosemary had a question.
Yes, thanks for your presentation. This was really, really interesting. I was wondering, are there any examples where people have parents as volunteers come in and do some of the care to reduce costs, kind of like the food co-op model where the members stock the shelves?
There's there's the history of childcare co-ops throughout the country really date back to preschool co-ops that started, and they were parent participation nursery schools basically. And a lot of states still have chapters and associations of those parent participation nursery schools, and then they also are full-day childcare, and they allow, usually you can, well, in California, we actually have a special section of the regulations that allow you to count volunteers in the ratio. And so definitely you can do that. And I think it's something that could be done for like lunch breaks and so forth. The problem is that, you know, parents are working, and so it's really hard for them to get away and participate. And so some of the participation now, there are non-classroom ways that parents can contribute, like for helping with bookkeeping or supplies and those kinds of things. But definitely, I think volunteer contributions are a part of most co-ops.
We have time for a couple more questions if there are any more out there.
How about some final thoughts from each of the speakers? Any lessons learned? If you could do it ideally, what would it look like?
Well, for me, it would be that that states offer special allowances for co-ops, and and there's more subsidy available. And I really think that, especially, so I have a passion for this area, and I really think that co-ops also work because they strengthen families. We don't have, you know, parents nowadays, we have smaller families, we don't have so many extended families. And so to be able to work with other parents and you know, have a close relationship with the teachers and the director of the center, it really helps families in addition. So we're not just talking about just, you know, childcare, we're talking about supporting families. So that's a final thought.
I guess we kind of did get to experience a do-over. We tried twice and didn't succeed. And you know, I think I mentioned these already, but just to highlight them, like if you get the right people at the table and they're driven to solve that need, it's really valuable. It's also really valuable to help people understand that power of cooperation. It's not an innate thing usually. We are competitors sometimes. So, you know, pooling your resources in an uneven manner sometimes benefits everybody really well as well. Just you know, finding a risk taker, like I showed that picture of that one banker and her willingness to just like at every turn, she was like, well, let's do it. What are we waiting for? Why don't we just move forward? And, you know, what percent of the population is risk takers? Is it like 1%? So to get somebody on board that's willing to make a change and take that risk for the good of everybody, that was very powerful.
I guess I would say, so this was one of the earlier feasibility studies I did, and compared to Kim and Lori, I definitely have a lot less knowledge in home care, childcare. So I would say that kind of an understanding of the industry is probably more important than the actual numbers. Like if than kind of knowing accounting. So I feel like people, when they approach feasibility studies, they get kind of intimidated, like, oh, there's so many numbers. I don't know where to start. You can start with, you know, the regulations, and then kind of, and then, you know, and trusting your own, if you know the industry, I think you should just trust yourself, you know, and you know, and trust your knowledge on that. I really relied on Kim a lot when we were working on this. You know, I don't have kids, so it's not something I ever really considered. So it was really, it was a learning process. You know, there's a lot of adjustments. You have to go back in and, you know, change things. And I think that's where the Excel and having kind of the formulas help a lot. But, you know, just kind of, but, you know, I think feasibility studies, you know, they're, it's a process. So I would, you know, not focus too much on like, oh, where do I start? I think it's just, once you start it, it's easier to kind of keep going. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
Well, thank you to all of our presenters. Kim Coons, you're a wealth of knowledge in this field. Thank you so much for sharing that. Lori, thank you for sharing the practical experience. And Jamie, wow, great job with those feasibility studies, with those spreadsheets. So this has been recorded. It will be available soon. Alex says it will be sent out soon. So thank you one and all for participating, and have a wonderful rest of the week.
Thanks so much to Margaret for coordinating this series this year. This has been really wonderful, and she put a lot of great organizational work into this. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.